All right, let's be real for a second. Every star you've ever looked up at, gone. Every word you said today, forgotten. Every city, every memory we've ever made, erased. Not in a million years, not in a billion. Try 10 quintillion. The Earth itself gone. 10 quintillion, that number is so massive, it basically breaks your brain. It's a 1 with 19 zeros. And here's the part that genuinely creeps me out. This isn't sci-fi, this is real science. So quick question, when you picture the future, how far do you actually go? 10 years, a lifetime, maybe 200. The pyramids have stood for over 4,000 years. And we call that ancient history. But here's what's hard to sit with. Human history is basically a blink in cosmic time. All the stuff we obsess over, the fights, the wars, the chaos, the climate anxiety, it's all happening on a stage so small and fragile that in the universe's timeline, it's basically invisible. And I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying it because there's something freeing about finally seeing things clearly. Let's start small, just to warm your brain up. In 1,000 years, none of the words you know will still exist. Language changes that fast. Shakespeare would probably struggle with modern English slang. So imagine trying to talk to someone 1,000 years from now. You wouldn't understand each other at all. And the sky, it looked the same at first glance, but the North Star, the one sailors and dreamers have relied on for centuries, will be replaced by Gamma Cephei. Small shift, right? But it shows you that even the heavens are temporary. Now, fast forward to 2,000 years, and things get dark. The ice sheets are completely gone. Global temperatures rise by 8 degrees Celsius. Sea levels climb 6 meters higher. And Greenland is just underwater. Funny thing, people panicked about 2012, but the Mayan calendar actually points to 5,125 as the real endpoint. So hey, if we survive that, we're on borrowed time anyway. But here's what I really want you to remember before we dive deeper. In 10 quintillion years, Earth won't exist. Not because we blew it up, not because of nuclear war, but because the sun itself, the same star that gave us life, will eventually swallow us whole. That's where we're headed. And along the way, we'll watch humans vanish, continents reshape themselves, the last star burn out, and the entire universe go dark. The only comfort, you won't be around to see it. But the decisions you make today, they're still part of the story. So get comfortable. Grab a drink, or whatever you need, and try to wrap your head around the most humbling fact in all of science. This is the story of how everything ends. We're going to take it one step at a time. Past the death of languages, the melting of worlds, the collapse of all life, all the way to the edge of reality itself. The clock is ticking. Just a really, really long one. Here's the thing. Just try this with me for a second. Imagine you could fire off one single tweet straight into the year 3025. Nobody would get it. And not just because Twitter's dead by then, but because the language itself, gone. Linguists say that within about 1,000 years, every word we use today will have morphed into something we wouldn't even recognize. That's not sci-fi. That's just how fast language drifts. Shakespeare wrote 400 years ago, and we already squint at his English like it's a foreign language. Multiply that by 2.5, you're looking at a planet where hello, love, even your own name, all of it, vanished. Replaced by sounds and grammar we can't even begin to guess. You'd basically be a time traveler who can't say a thing to anyone. But the language shift, that's just the opening act. Because the sky itself is about to swap out its anchor. You know, the North Star Polaris, that one fixed point every navigator, every sailor, every lost person staring up at the night has relied on. It's not going to hold that spot anymore. In about 1,000 years, Earth's axial wobble shifts, and the star that takes over is called Gamma Cephei, a brand new North Star. So if you're walking around thinking certain things are just permanent, let this be your first heads up. Even the stars take turns. And that's not poetic metaphor. That's literally how celestial mechanics works. The Earth doesn't spin like a perfect, steady top. It wobbles more like a coin spinning out of momentum. And over thousands of years, that wobble moves the axis of our entire sky. Your kids' kids won't just grow up with a different culture, different tech, a different language. They'll navigate by a completely different star. Now this next part, I want you to really sit with it, because it's easy to hear big numbers and just nod along. 1,000 years is not that far apart. It's shorter than the stretch between the Vikings raiding the English coast and us. Today, it's less time than the gap between when the Great Pyramid was built and when Cleopatra was even born. When we talk about 1,000 years from now, we're not floating in abstract sci-fi. That's roughly the same distance between you and people who had no idea the Earth was round. And in that span, which cosmically is basically a blink, every word you spoke this morning, even in this very video, just fades out without a trace. The scriptures, the love letters, the legal papers, songs you cried to, texts you kept rereading, all of it, nothing left. Every piece of your inner world that was ever written down becomes as indecipherable as linearized, the first layer of your own erasure, and it happens sooner than you think. So here's the messy question I want you to keep in your back pocket while we keep going deeper. If 1,000 years wipes out your language and moves the North Star, what's 1,000,000 years going to do? How about 1,000,000,000? What does that mean for everything you actually care about? So we haven't even gone to the ice sheets melting, the nuclear waste, the sun finally burning out, but you're already getting the picture, right? Nothing you know was built to last. And honestly, we've only taken a couple of small steps into this whole thing. So let's keep going. So here's something wild to wrap your head around. What if climate change stops being this giant political fight and just becomes geology? Fast forward 2,000 years, the planet warms up 8 degrees Celsius. Not 1.5, not 2.8. Greenland's ice sheet gone, not shrunk, completely melted, sea levels rise about 6 meters. Doesn't sound insane at first, right? But here's the kicker. Every coastal city you've ever known, New York, Shanghai, Mumbai, London, underwater, not partially gone, the map of the world in your head, it doesn't exist anymore. And here's the weird part that really gets under your skin. If you were alive back then, you wouldn't even call it a catastrophe, because you never knew the old coastlines. Sure, your grandparents might tell you stories about the Statue of Liberty's torch still poking out above the water, but to you, that sounds like a myth. In deep time, even disaster becomes normal. And honestly, there's something strangely comforting about that, right? The things we're terrified of right now, they just become someone else's history lesson. Now let's jump ahead 5,125 years. I know the number sounds oddly specific, but that's when the Mayan calendar rolls around again. Same cycle that freaked everyone out in 2012. People swore the world was ending. Spoiler, it didn't. The Mayans weren't predicting doom. They were tracking a cycle, and cycles, unlike endings, keep going. So life ticks along, then we hit 20,000 years. Chernobyl, the site of the worst nuclear disaster in human history, finally becomes safe to walk around without protective gear. No radiation, no danger. The scar we carved into the earth has healed, just enough for nature to take it all back. And here's a twist to sit with for a second. Climate change doesn't stop at 2,000 years. Even with just 2 degrees of warming, the models show Greenland's ice still completely melts. All that ice, covering an island the size of Mexico, becomes water. But here's the thing, we never get to choose which feeling lingers longer. The horror of that melt, or the quiet fact that Chernobyl, the ultimate symbol of human failure, outlasts its own danger. We build these timelines in our heads, thinking things will get better or worse. But the Earth doesn't care. It just keeps running the clock. It doesn't need us to survive it. It just will, whether we're around to see it or not. All right, this one might mess with your head a little. Picture yourself standing in Niagara Falls. You feel that mist on your face, hear that thunderous roar, and it feels like the whole planet is vibrating under your feet. It makes you feel small, but in a beautiful way. And it feels permanent, right? Your grandparents saw the exact same falls. Humans have been standing there watching that water crash down for thousands of years. But here's the kicker. In about 50,000 years, it's gone completely. The last stretch of rock between the falls and Lake Erie slowly erodes until there's nothing left to fall. No dramatic collapse, no cinematic finale, just a quiet, relentless grinding until one day the water flows smooth and it's just another river. That's the truth about erosion, and honestly, about time itself. It doesn't need to be dramatic to be devastating. Now here's where it gets even heavier. Around that same 50,000-year mark, we thought Greenland's ice was long gone, right? Scientists have already mapped out extreme warming events that melted those ice sheets thousands of years ago. But the scary part is they ran another scenario. Just a modest 2 degrees of warming. Not extreme, not catastrophic, literally just 2 degrees. And Greenland's ice still completely melts. Not because of some runaway climate disaster, just gradual, steady warming. Which means even the so-called best-case scenarios that politicians love to cling to, we've already locked future generations into a planet without Greenland's ice. No debate, no politics, just math and time. But the part that really makes you sit back, around the 100,000-year mark, that titanium in your MacBook, that expensive machine sitting on your desk right now, the one you're probably scrolling on, that titanium finally starts to corrode. Think about that for a second. Every laptop, every phone, every piece of tech you've ever owned, reduced to pure dust 10 times over. Every photo you've taken, every message you've typed, everything you saved to the cloud, all gone. Zero trace that digital civilization ever existed. Even the supervolcano that's bound to erupt, or the asteroid that statistically is almost certainly going to slam into Earth by then. They'll just add to the erasure, and nobody will be around to read about it, because the only things left standing at that point are the forces of geology itself. But the most surreal part of this whole timeline, the part that genuinely bends my brain, is the stars. In 100,000 years, the sky is not going to look anything like it does tonight. Not because the stars changed, because the Earth itself is moving through the galaxy, and our entire cosmic neighborhood shifts along with us. The constellations you drew in school, Orion's belt you look for every winter, the Big Dipper you've shown your kids, they won't exist in the same shape anymore. The night sky that's been humanity's constant companion since we first crawled out of caves and looked up, that sky isn't permanent either. So next time you're overwhelmed by problems that feel enormous today, just remember, even Niagara Falls is temporary. The stars in your sky are temporary, and everything you own gone 1,000 times over before the sky even changes shape, which naturally makes you wonder if we already know all this is temporary. Why do we hold on so tight to things that will vanish long before the universe finishes what it started? 500,000 years. Let that really sink in for a second. The spent nuclear fuel sitting inside today's reactors, the stuff we still don't fully know what to do with, will at that point finally be safe. No more radiation threat. The problem we've been arguing about for decades just dissolves. And around that exact same time, the planet swings into another global freeze. The ice comes back, another ice age. We obsess so much over warming, but deep time doesn't care. It just cycles hot, cold, hot, cold. And somewhere in that rhythm, the last trace of our nuclear age becomes completely harmless. No announcement, no ceremony, it just quietly stops being dangerous. But here's the part that really gets me. 1 million years from now, all the glass we've ever manufactured, every skyscraper window, every smartphone screen, every beer bottle you've ever tossed into a bin will have completely degraded, gone dissolved back into the earth like it never existed. And think about what that actually means. You know, those moments where you hold something made of glass and think, this will last forever?